Welcome to the 2022-23 Law Commission Research Assistant Outreach event. This is a recording of a live event which was held on 1st December 2022. Due to technical difficulties, the first couple of minutes of this event were not recorded. This recording begins with the Chair of the Law Commission, Sir Nicholas Green, welcoming attendees. We hope you found this recording useful and wish you the best of luck in your application.
I'm always keen to assist the RAs with their job promotional prospects, doing mock interviews and helping them with their CVs. They are invariably an extremely bright, knowledgeable and troublesome lot. They keep us all challenged and they have strong views about everything. They are very much the lifeblood of the organisation. As you probably know, we have just short of 20 RAs joining us on an annual basis. So far as the Law Commission is concerned in the broader jobs market, which is something I'm sure you'll all be interested in, I think I can say with confidence that if you spend some time with us, it is a tremendously powerful platform to whatever you wish to do next, whether it's to become a solicitor or a barrister or go into government or do something else. All our RAs are generally successful in going on to greater and better things. So without more, I'm going to hand it back to the team and anybody who does have questions, as I say, send them through on the Q&A and we will endeavour to answer them. Anyway, I wish you all the best of luck and I'll pass you back now.
Thank you. Who we are, we're a statutory body that was created by the Law Commission Act 1965. It's admittedly fairly dry, so I won't recommend it as any background reading, but it essentially stipulates that there'll be a body called the Law Commission, and that body will be made of a chair and 4 other law commissioners. The chair, who you've just heard from, is a senior judge, and the other commissioners are drawn from the judiciary, academia, the bar, or solicitors. The current mix is there's 3 academics and 1 KC. Previous law commissioners have included Lady Hale and Lord Burrows, and previous chairs have also included Lady Arden and Lord Lloyd Jones. What we're about, we're independent, we're an arm's length body, albeit situated in the MOJ. Our jurisdiction is England and Wales, and we advise the UK and Welsh governments. We work with the Welsh Advisory Committee, and we're sponsored by the MOJ. In the event anyone is interested in our funding model, there is a memorandum of understanding available on the website somewhere. I'll now hand over to Sheena, who will discuss.
So this is where we are. So we have quite a flexible working arrangement, but generally you're required to come into the office 2 days a week at a minimum. So we're located on the 1st floor of the Ministry of Justice building, which is in the centre of London. So it's right in the middle of Whitehall and different government bodies. And it's right beside St James's Park and Buckingham Palace, a nice lunch spot when it's warmer than it currently is. The office admittedly is not the nicest from the outside, but it is much nicer inside where we all are currently. And there's a big central atrium and a subsidised canteen. And as the chair mentioned, it's an open plan office with banks of desks, but with no set desks apart from the commissioners and chair, and even they don't have their own office. So it's really accessible. It's very easy to ask anyone questions and to bump into people in the office, which is nice. Although there is also a quiet zone for when you don't want to speak to anyone. This is the organisational structure. So the RAs or research assistants are at the bottom and we report to lawyers. So generally you'll work quite closely with one lawyer on your set project. The lawyers, one of them will be the head of each team. So there's the Commercial and Common Law or COCO team, Property, Family and Trust or PFT, Criminal and Public Law and the Law in Wales. There is also a commissioner at the head of each team, as James mentioned, and then everyone reports to the CEO and the chair. There's also some non-legal staff, so HR, administrative and finance matters, and also a full-time economist. And there are 2 parliamentary counsel as well who will help us with draft bills when projects might include those. The structure looks quite intimidating, but it really doesn't feel that way in practice. The teams are very small and it definitely feels like a very flat hierarchy. Everyone's very approachable, very friendly. And other things to note might be that we currently don't have a chief executive, so there will be a new CEO coming soon, and there will also be a new chair soon. There are also, I don't think it's mentioned on this, but some non-executive directors, including Joshua Rosenberg, whose work you might have read or be familiar.
So there are two significant sources of how the Law Commission gets its projects. Primarily, there are programmes of law reform. So every few years, a consultation will take place with the public, but also with any interested parties suggesting potential ideas for law reform, which then get approved by the Lord Chancellor. And these are supplemented to some degree by specific issues that departments might like the Law Commission to address, so issues that the government particularly has on its agenda that it thinks the Law Commission is well suited to deal with. They'll make references, and then the Law Commission will take on some of those projects as well. And there are some criteria that the Law Commission bears in mind when it's deciding whether or not to proceed with a project. So those include the importance of the project being proposed. So this requires assessing whether the law is in fact unsatisfactory in the area and whether or not reform will make any significant difference, whether people or businesses are actually being impacted by what is said to be unsatisfactory. We have to consider suitability, so whether the Law Commission with its particular features, which you heard about a little earlier, whether that makes the Law Commission the most suitable body to conduct the review with its independence. So that reflects things like the Law Commission won't undertake anything which is strictly party political. So that might involve government priorities about allocating funding. That's not going to be best suited for an independent arm's length body to be conducting a review of. We also take into account the resources, so the expertise and experience of the people working at the Law Commission, including the lawyers within each team and any funding within government funding constraints. And then it's a really important feature of the work that's done at the Law Commission is that nothing is undertaken which the government hasn't committed to implementing reform on. There would be no point investing time, expertise, energy and money into producing these really important reports recommending reform if there was never any intention to implement them. So that means a level of departmental support is required before each project is undertaken. So just briefly, we're currently mid-14th programme of law reform. So there was a public consultation during last year, which had over 500 responses, which ended with nearly 200 unique project suggestions. And then the previous programme of law reform, the 13th programme, that is how 2/3 of the project, of which the Law Commission agreed on, came, and the other third came from these specific references from the ministers and departments, as I just explained.
So, hi everybody, I'm going to talk you through the stages of a project, and it really depends on what project you're on and where you come onto the project as a research assistant, what you'll get to do as a research assistant. But firstly, there's the initiation stage. That's when we're discussing the terms of reference with government, discussing within the team what the pertinent issues are, and doing research on priority stakeholders. And then the pre-consultation stage is when we initially meet with some priority stakeholders, we do some further research and check that we've covered all the important issues that need to be covered in the project. Consultation is a big stage where, as a research assistant, you may have to engage in stakeholder management, which might mean setting up meetings with stakeholders, focus groups, symposiums, and thinking about ways to reach diverse people. We also put out a paper with our provisional proposals in the consultation stage, and our provisional proposals is what we initially think and what we are initially proposing to reform. And the consultation period for stakeholders to respond is usually about 3 months. Once all the consultation responses have come in, then we enter into policy development stage. At that stage, we analyse all the consultation responses, and there can be a small amount. I've known projects that have a really small amount, but some projects that have had over 1,000 responses. So it can take a varied amount of time. You consider any new ideas that were raised during that time. We're encouraged to contribute whatever we think as well as research assistants. It's not just a job for lawyers. You're encouraged to contribute your own ideas. And also, it kind of depends what stage of the project it already is, as to how involved you are in policy development. And then finally, there's the final report stage, which is can include lots of different things. It might be drafting whole chapters, it might be compiling chapters, formatting. It also is time to get involved in communications, which can be really interesting. Things like preparing for press releases before the final report is released. And you can get involved in draft bill if there's a bill that's going to be attached to the report. I've been lucky enough on my project that there is a draft bill, so I've been involved in helping to instruct Parliamentary Council on a bill that's going to go alongside our final report. And then after that, what happens depends on if government wants to take on our reforms forward or not. Next slide, please. Yes, so it's government's decision whether to implement our reforms or not. As an arm's length body, we do not lobby, but we may assist the government if required. We can assist with things like thought processes. And then we have a protocol with the UK and Welsh governments, which means that they must respond within 6 months of our report, whether they're going to initially give us an idea of whether they're going to take on our proposals or not. And then they must respond as a final decision within 1 year. And there's an annual report to Parliament, which is the Lord Chancellor prepares, and he lays before Parliament, he or she, annual report to Parliament, and it sets out what implementations have been accepted, what have been rejected, and it's produced each year, and as soon as practicable after the end of each year. A high percentage of recommendations do go through in some form. As you can see on the slide, 2/3 of final reports are implemented in whole or in part, so that's a figure we're quite proud of. Excellent. So the next slide is a brief overview of what projects are going on in each team at the moment. As mentioned earlier, there's 4 teams. I am a research assistant in the Property, Family and Trust Law team, so I'm just going to talk you through some of the projects in that area. So surrogacy and weddings are both projects that are all about trying to make outdated legislation fit for modern life. Then we have the residential leasehold and commonhold projects, which is an umbrella of a lot of different projects, including commonhold, enfranchisement, and right to manage. I wish I knew more about property law to explain those properly in detail, but I don't. So as you may can tell, I'm not on those projects. And the wills project is something that was done, the consultation was done in 2017. They're specifically looking at testamentary capacity and formalities. It was paused because a government reference came in to do the weddings project as a more urgent project. And so now we're restarting that work. And finally, disposal of the dead is an interesting project. Is about methods of disposal of the dead which are being developed, which are completely unregulated in the UK. And it's also about ensuring that a person's own wishes as to the disposal of their remains are carried out to avoid family disputes. So now I'm going to pass on to another team.
So I'm on the criminal law team. The project I'm currently working on is evidence in sexual offences, which the consultation paper will be published fairly soon. So that's the criminal law team's next publication. That's looking at some quite broad-ranging issues in sexual offences trials, which include admission of prior sexual behaviour evidence on the part of complainants. It includes issues about special measures which complainants are entitled to. So it's quite a broad-ranging review of how sexual offences trials are conducted. It forms part of the MOJ rape review. A project which we've recently published the final report on is confiscation of the proceeds of crime. So that's come out recently. That's recommending some reforms to make the system fairer, easier to understand, less complex, a pretty wholesale review of the area of criminal law of confiscation. And then 2 projects which are in a much earlier stage, so the pre-consultation stage, are criminal appeals and contempt of court. So appeals is looking at various aspects to do with whether the tests for allowing appeals in the Court of Appeal are getting the right number of cases through, whether they can appropriately deal with miscarriages of justice. And it's also looking at the role of the Criminal Cases Review Commission. So lots of very interesting areas there, which is involving talking to lots of judicial stakeholders. And then contempt of court is overlaps with the public law team to a certain extent, and it's trying to bring some logic into the area of law of contempt, which is very wide-ranging. There are lots of different discrete areas, so that's involving a lot of really interesting scoping work for the people on the criminal law team on that project.
I'm a research assistant on the Public Law and Law in Wales team. Our work is quite varied. Our projects tend to involve public law and regulation in England and Wales, and we also take on projects for the Welsh Government on matters of devolved law. So our current projects are on the screen. The first one, automated vehicles. But this is a project about how to safely deploy self-driving cars on roads in Great Britain. A report was published in January 2022 addressing issues such as initial approval and authorisation of vehicles, and the team are now helping with the process of introducing legislation. The remote driving project builds on the automated vehicles project and looks at the technology that allows a vehicle to be driven from a remote location, and will be publishing advice in 2023 on that. My project is the Autonomy in Aviation project. So this is a really exciting project looking at the regulation of autonomous flight, for example, some forms of drones and air taxis. The technology in this area is developing really quickly, but the current regulatory framework doesn't necessarily accommodate this. So we're looking at how to safely support those developments. And then finally, our most recent Welsh project concerned coal tip safety. And at the moment, we don't have a Welsh specific project, but we have been working closely with the Welsh Government to identify future Welsh projects and have recently been involved in getting the first consolidation bill through the Welsh Parliament.
So on the commercial and common law team, we have a variety of projects at different stages. The majority of them at the moment are related to emerging technology. So first one, digital assets, considers digital assets such as crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, and NFTs from a private law perspective. And we published a consultation paper in summer, the main proposal of which was that there should be a third category of personal property. So in addition to shows in action and shows in possession, that would be called data objects. And we've just closed the consultation period on that. So the team are now analysing the responses to that. The DAOs, or Decentralized Autonomous Organizations project, is probably the one I think we all know least about. And we recently published a call for evidence, so asking market participants, academics, experts in the field for both kind of the technology behind it as well as the legal aspects. The Arbitration Act is the only one that isn't really technology specific. So the consultation paper was published recently in September, and at the moment we're engaged in a lot of stakeholder events, so with members of the judiciary, practitioners, barristers, and things like that. The electronic trade documents project has been going on for a while, and it is now concluded, but there's an ETD's bill that's currently going through the parliamentary process. So we are supporting that. The Law Commission is supporting that behind the scenes, with the department who's bringing that through, which is a really exciting process, and hopefully I'll be able to go with the Commissioner and my lawyer to the House of Lords and see an evidence session. So that's a really exciting period for that project. And then the Conflict of Laws and Emerging Technology project is my project, and essentially it's considering the private international law rules of England and Wales as they apply to digital assets. So it's building on our other tech-related projects, and the kind of core problem we're trying to address is that the traditional focus of private international rules is on territorial connecting factors, and that becomes very difficult to apply and not particularly meaningful when you're then looking at distributed, decentralized assets. So this project is at the pre-consultation stage, so I've been involved in a lot of research, analysing the scope of the project and different policy options, and managing stakeholder engagement and meetings with different stakeholders.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm a research assistant in the Property, Family and Trust Law team. So to enable all of this work to happen, the Commission recruits up to 18 research assistants or RAs each year. We come in on a one-year contract starting in September, although depending on the needs of the organisation, some people do stay on, usually for up to a further year. You can apply to any of the 4 teams that you've just heard about. Next slide, please. So what do RAs actually do? The answer depends quite a lot on the stage your project is at, although there are always opportunities to engage with other projects to round out your experience, and you will move along the process with your project. So if you're at the pre-consultation stage, you'll be conducting research so that we have a deep understanding of the law in the areas that we want to reform. You'll be working with the lawyers and commissioners on your project to seek to tease out some of the difficult problems that the project wants to answer, and helping to make the first suggestions as to what those answers might be. In the consultation stage, you'll be working with your team to write that research and those proposals up into a consultation paper for publication. You'll be networking with stakeholders, running events to gather responses to our ideas, and then analysing those responses to develop policy. And then finally, in the report stage, you'll be writing up reports, as the name suggests. RAs often write chapters of the reports that we publish, so that's an exciting chance to sort of have your name attached to a publication. And excitingly, you will also be working with Parliamentary Council to draft the laws that would put that policy into practice. Your days as a research assistant vary. There is obviously hard graft involved, and sometimes, for example, a lot of consultation responses to go through. But there's also varied and challenging research tasks that really stretch your skills, and a chance to be part of an interesting and meaningful conversation about how the law affects people, businesses, and society. Next slide, please. So why should you consider becoming a research assistant? Being an RA really exposes you to the cutting edge of developments in the law. On the policy issue that you work on, you will become ultimately an expert and develop the skills that you need to become expert in other fields that you might come across in the future. You'll not only understand the law in a really deep way, you'll also be writing the reports that academics and lawyers elsewhere will refer to, and your input to those reports really counts. You'll get an insight into how the law is developed and the policy considerations it involves in a way that nowhere else offers. If you work in policy, you might see some of the law. If you work in the law, you might have some interactions with policy. Here we do both, and it is genuinely a unique environment. All of that on top of quite favourable civil service terms and conditions. We work 37 hours a week, so somewhat different to some of the training contracts or pupilages you might see out there. That includes flexi time and a good amount of volunteering and development leave as well. You'll be working with a friendly group of other RAs who are all in the same boat as you, as well as a nurturing and supporting set of lawyers and commissioners who will both challenge and develop you. And as you can see from the slide, they're all eager to share pictures of their cute and, in some cases, magical pets. On top of that, the Commission takes a proactive approach to your career development. You're working alongside people with vast experience at the bar and in various commercial and public law environments, and they are happy to share their insight with you and open doors where they can do so. You can also find development opportunities within the wider civil service, like shadowing ministerial private offices, and we support marshalling and advocacy training too. The Commission's work is highly regarded across the sector, so your time here will place you highly in the esteem of solicitors' firms, barristers' chambers, and across the policy and legal world.
So the next few slides set out the application process. Applications are open throughout January, so you've got about a month to really think about whether you want to apply, and then you've got about a month to actually fill in your application. The application form itself is quite long, so it's recommended that you spend at least 3 hours filling it in. I'd recommend doing several drafts if you can, so I'd start early and write your answers into a Word document before you actually fill in the form itself and submit it. An updated guide for applicants will be available on the website later on this month. This is really useful, so I'd really recommend reading it multiple times. It's very detailed and very helpful. For example, it tells you what should be included in your answers to the questions on the form, and it also tells you how your CV should be formatted. I remember printing mine out and scribbling all over it, so would really recommend you do the same. Before you apply, you need to make sure that you meet the academic requirements. So by September 2023, you must have 2 years of legal studies and a first class or high T1 degree with elements of first class work. Slide, please. So on the screen now, there's a flow chart as to the application process overall. So as previously mentioned, the first stage is the application form. And once you've submitted this, you have 5 days to complete a situational judgment test, and the link for that will be emailed to you. And the situational judgment test in particular will be discussed in more detail in a moment. The Law Commission set a pass score, so if you meet that pass score, you'll then move forward in the process. And if you've met that pass score, then each team will consider your application. So for example, if you're applying to the public law team will consider your application form and determine who should further progress in the recruitment process. If you progress past that SIFT stage, then you'll sit a written test, which is set by the team you're applying to. So for example, I was in a fictional scenario and asked to advise a minister based on materials that I was provided with. Then at interview, you'll be asked a mixture of behaviour and competency questions. So for example, in my interview, we began with some quite standard interview questions, such as how do I stay organised? And then we moved on to discuss some more technical aspects. So I was sent a piece of legislation beforehand to prepare, and then we discussed that and I was asked some questions about that. Finally, I just want to mention that if you have a disability and you would benefit from reasonable adjustments during the recruitment process, for example, extra time during the written test, just email the recruitment inbox. We'll put the details on the screen later with any adjustments that you need. And in that same vein, the Law Commission offers a guaranteed interview scheme if you have a disability. So you'll be given an interview if you meet the academic requirements, pass the situational judgment test and meet a minimum standard on your application form. So in summary, if you have a disability, you have a high T1 or first class degree and 2 years of legal studies, you pass the situational judgment test and your application form meets minimum standards set by the team you're applying to, then you'll be guaranteed an interview.
The online application form will consist of a CV and 4 written questions. The CV is name blind. There's a template CV available in the guide for applicants with information on how your CV should be structured. It has to be in a particular manner, and there's rules available in the template and guide for applicants. I appreciate it does make the application slightly more long-winded, but not following these requirements either makes it look like you haven't been bothered to read them or that you were sloppy when doing so. So I would avoid doing that. Tom and Jess will touch more on tips for the form later. The only point I would emphasise now is the slightly trite point that make sure you read the question properly. So on the research question, for example, it asks not only for evidence that you can research, but also how you conducted that research. So how did you ensure that you had properly consulted the relevant sources and hadn't missed anything off in the literature, or that you hadn't missed the case? So again, I would say make sure you read the question and answer the question directly. And then the SJT, this was a test that was introduced the last year, and it's essentially how you would respond to typical scenarios that you will face as an RA, and it tests against the civil service behaviours that are listed on the PowerPoint. More information on those behaviours is available online. If you go civil service success profiles, then you're able to find what those behaviours are and what they would be for the level of job which is EO. I would say it's a reasonably straightforward test, albeit with some specificity to what we do as an RA. It is similar to other SJTs that are used in other parts of the civil service. I think the FastStream uses similar tests as well. So if you were looking for practice tests, that would be a good place to start. Final point that I would add before moving on is that you do have to submit your online application before you sit the SJT. I suggest it'd be immensely frustrating if you spend however many hours on your written application to then get rejected at the situational judgment test stage. So although it's not necessarily a particularly daunting test, it is worth taking seriously and investing some time in. I'll now hand over to Jess and Tom, who are lawyers at the Law Commission, who may well be marking your applications.
Yes, hello everyone. So we're going to be giving you some tips, Tom and I, on filling in your application form. So you have different competencies that you'll be asked about. And so we'll each consider some of them and give you some advice about how to approach it. So I'll kick off with teamwork, which is an essential competency. Of course, you'll be working with many other people at the Commission. You see some of us here on this video. They will be your peers, other researchers, as well as lawyers. But then you also have the importance of teamwork and collaboration with the stakeholders that we consult with. It's a very important part of what we do. So also being able to demonstrate your ability to interact with others in a way that is engaging and effective. So what we're looking for is not necessarily a legal example, it's you demonstrating your ability to show these skills and give us a glimpse of, you know, all your talents in that direction. So for example, you know, you can do it through being a shop assistant, or other examples from your personal life or in a sport. Those are always like really valuable aspects as well. Of course, if you worked on a mooting team, we're not certainly going to discount that. But that's on the teamwork side. What I would say with teamwork, like a pitfall to avoid, is talking like you're part of a team, but then really focusing on how you're always leading it. That's a separate competency, but I found that sometimes when we ask the teamwork question, people tended to focus on what a great job they did themselves of leading everyone else. And although that's really important, it's not really quite demonstrating the collaborative aspect. So I'd really encourage you to think about that aspect. But then obviously leadership is also an important part. You'll sometimes be asked to take on a task and really make it your own and take it forward without having to constantly get feedback from the rest of your team. So what I would say here is don't just roll off a shopping list of positions that you've held. That is not doing justice to yourself. Like, we would encourage you to really think about giving us examples of where you were working with others and how you led them. So not just rather the label of the position, but giving us a bit of a feel for what you did as part of it. And Tom, can tell us a bit about the communication side of things.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, everyone. Yes, communication, obviously really, really important, written and oral. Jess alluded to sort of mooting as an example. Obviously, that's a good legal example, but it is broader than that. There's an example on the slide of dealing with a difficult customer. So it's sort of broad is good. The one thing we were going to highlight is the form sort of overall, and the interview, which we'll come on to, is a really good place to demonstrate communication skills. So that goes from sort of simple things such as sort of typos being really bad, but to sort of broader points about structure and writing concisely being really important and sort of reflecting really well. One other thing we sort of wanted to mention is not trying to impress with sort of overly legalistic and complicated language, because that the Law Commission writes publications for all sort of varieties of audience. It needs to be understood by sort of members of the public who have no legal background to sort of experts in the field, and so showing you can sort of write in that sort of style can be really effective. Just going quickly on to working under pressure, which is sort of speaks for itself. Commonly people sort of talk about working to a deadline. Again, having something slightly different that's non-legalistic can be very sort of effective. So the example on the slide of working during a really busy period, such as Black Friday, can be sort of stand out bit. I think on the next slide. So on the application form itself, the best method to use is the STAR method. Lots of people might have heard about this already. It's the best way of giving examples of strengths or skills and sort of thinking about your experiences and explaining them to others. So rather than just sort of saying in the abstract, I'm really good at working in a team, this is the method to use. So running very quickly through, there's an example on the slide. You want to sort of set out the situation first. That can be very brief. So in this example, I was working in a shop. There was a computer error, effectively. That sort of sets the context. Then the task, so what you had to achieve. So we wanted to check the label prices, you know, that kind of thing. The action is crucial. So what did you do and how did you do it? So here you've suggested an approach of printing off sort of separate lists, etc. why did you take that approach? So I took it to sort of improve efficiency, avoid duplicating work, etc. And then you obviously sort of summarize with the result. That can also be quite short. Sort of we adopted the approach, completed the task on time, no one fell out, etc. So that's the best method to use when you're sort of writing your form and answering the questions. And as James said, answering the questions directly is definitely a good tip. I think Jess is going to quickly go on the written test.
Yes, so after you've shown everyone how you're a star, you can go on to fill in, if you're selected for interview, and write out a test, or a research exercise will also be sent to you, and you have a choice of when to take it. You're not expected to have any background knowledge. You'll be given all the materials that you need within the test, so it's freestanding in that sense. In terms of the length of what you're expected to produce, it's 1,750 words, which is about 3 to 4 pages, of average sized paper. And what I would encourage you to think about in respect to the written test is also the way that you format and organize it. So, for example, the written tests that have been most impressive tend to be the ones that have like a really concise and clear conclusion, sometimes stated at the front, so that person reading it knows where you're going with it, and then has underlined and organized materials in a way that is just easy to understand, because also the person reading it, the way that you present it to them, it can help them understand it. So it's not just using the simple and clear language, as Tom was saying, but it's also about the way that you put it forward. And of course, typos are a big no-no. So when you're figuring out how to use your time, do allow for time to actually read through it yourself and make sure that it flows, and that you've worked that in, because it is a part of what you're assessed on as well, in your ability to communicate. Next slide, please. So Tom will say a bit more about the actual interview itself. What I guess I would say in respect to the interviews over the years that I've seen that have been most impressive, they tend to be the people that convey a sense of enthusiasm and like really caring. And so having read a little bit about the subject, if the legal research question is about something the Law Commission has written about, it makes really a lot of sense, and it pays back a lot for you to actually have a look at some of our consultation papers on the topic and be familiar with some of the debates. Or for example, looking at Hansard and looking at what Parliament debates have been saying on the topic. So demonstrating that kind of broader interest that engages with the policy elements, as well as the work the Law Commissions might have done on the topic, if it's applicable. Those things really help you stand out, and also can help you elaborate your own thoughts in a way that might be a bit more interesting and different than the more vanilla and straightforward arguments you might otherwise come across. Over to you, Tom.
Yes. Yeah, so there are a variety of questions in the interview, ranging from legal research questions. So we'll start with that. It's likely you'll have legal research questions that may require pre-reading. They'll probably be related to some of the sort of current or recent work of the team you're applying for, and you'll likely be set pre-reading. That's definitely obviously the place to start. Really getting to grips with that reading will probably stand you in sort of as good stead as can be, rather than necessarily going off and reading thousands of cases. As Jess says, though, having some interest in it and reading around it a bit could be very useful. It's likely that will be to test legal understanding. So you may be asked sort of scenarios and asked to sort of apply the law to it, or to test policy analysis. So it's definitely worth having that in mind as you prepare. Sort of whether you agree with, if you're reading something like a consultation paper or a report, whether you agree with the conclusions reached by the Law Commission, or sort of what you might have sort of think differently about something. It's worth having those sort of prepared. Basic interview questions on the slide. We aren't trying to catch you out yet. They're not trick interviews. I think the interviewers really genuinely want to know why someone wants to do the job, or why you want to do the job. So when you're preparing for the interview, just focusing on the substantive law and the pre-reading, that's good stuff. But don't forget to think about why you want to work for the Law Commission specifically, as a research assistant, you know, what you might think you'd enjoy most in the job or least in the job or whatever, what the current projects of the team you're applying for are, what you're sort of interested in specifically, what you think the issues are with them, who the stakeholders might be, all that sort of stuff is just worth sort of thinking through those kind of issues. And we were going to say, obviously, a lot of the things that come out in the application form, so the strengths and skills that you're asked about, those are being tested throughout the interview as well, so it's worth thinking further about those when you're preparing. There are videos on the website that would definitely worth watching, and as it says on the slide, practicing is sort of invaluable with a friend or with anyone, getting feedback, getting used to the sort of interview dynamic. We have one other tip, which is again about communication, because it's so important. It's definitely fine, the standard advice, but taking a breath and a moment to think when you're asked a question is definitely sensible. If you're unsure about something, or if you need something repeated, asking is absolutely fine, you know, and definitely the right thing to do. And then when you do come to answer, sort of answering concisely, sticking to the point is a good approach. Don't feel like you need to go on just because no one's interrupted you. If you've said what you want to say in response to the question, and you want the sort of thing that you want to finish, that's absolutely the right approach to take. I think that's it.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry about that. So the Law Commission represents both England and Wales, so we're really keen to encourage applications from Welsh speakers so that it can help us maintain and develop our relationship with the people of Wales. There'll be a note in the guide for applicants about where you should note that down, but it's usually in the communication section of the skills and behaviour questions. So please do make sure you write down if you can speak Welsh with your level of proficiency, especially kind of written and spoken. And then as a Welsh speaking research assistant, you'll play a key role in helping support the Commission's Welsh language policy and act as an ambassador on issues affecting Wales and the Welsh language. For example, you'll attend events in Wales and ensure that the Law Commission's publications make sense in Welsh and things like that. And it takes up about 20% of an individual's time, so flexibility is required to make sure that you get an effective balance between this role and other RA duties.
Hi, I'm Deanna. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at the Law Commission, and I'm just going to sort of get us started on questions. Before I start off, I just want to note that I know a lot of you guys have questions on recruitment, and you'll see I've posted in the chat a link to our website, which has the eligibility requirements for RAs. But if you still have questions, please feel free to email our recruitment email. I think we'll post it later in the chat. And before I pass on to someone else, I saw that there's a question that I can actually answer in the chat, which is whether we're open to recruiting international students and what diversity at our workplace looks like. So we are open to international students. I'm international. We have international RAs and other legal staff, as long as you meet the eligibility requirements and have the right to work in the UK. As an employer, the Law Commission is very committed to diversity. We have a diversity and inclusion strategy, and my position was created just so I could work on diversity and inclusion. And there's lots of opportunities for other members of the Law Commission to get involved with our diversity work if that's something that you're passionate about. So now I thought I might pass on to Eleanor, who spoke about interviews, because there have been some questions sort of like what you wish you knew before you went to your interview and what things went well for you.
I think the biggest thing that I wish I'd known before my interview was how friendly people were. I think that's a bit of a cliche, but genuinely my interview was quite a nice experience. Although if your interview isn't a nice experience, that's not a bad thing. I think I'm very fortunate to say that. I just felt as though the lawyers who were interviewing me were really trying to get the best out of me, and they weren't trying to trip me up. And I think my biggest tip would just be to be yourself, which again is really cliche, but I think that ultimately you're not only trying to prove your abilities, so obviously make sure that you're well prepared, and if you're sent material in advance, to really look at that and to have opinions and to really understand it. But also let your personality show, because the lawyers are also trying to work out whether you are somebody that they would like to work with, essentially. And we have a really nice team here. So I think just being yourself and communicating as you would if you were just having a conversation.
Yeah, so we had a couple more questions about sort of how much choice you get on what project you work on. So maybe Izzy, you've been here for a while, maybe you could answer that.
Yeah, sure. So on the application form, you have to apply for one particular team. And on that form, you may also be asked to give your preference. So certainly in property, family and trusts, because it's quite a diverse team, you would be asked whether you'd be more interested in the property side of things or the more interested in the family side of things. So I work on the surrogacy law project, and I got the opportunity to state that as my preference. And in the interview, they also asked me what my second preference would be. I don't know about other teams' experiences, and we may go to someone else for that. But certainly in the property, family and trust team, you really got a say in what you were doing. But that isn't a guarantee on anything, because obviously some projects might have more of a need for research assistance than another one.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt. I've also been here just over a year, and I'm on the automated vehicles or self-driving cars project. And so what I would add is, if you're interested in the Law Commission, you probably don't have a specific area that you are really like an expert in. So I would say apply to a team, take a project that you find interesting, explain why you find it interesting. But for me on the public law team, it was, if you're in a self-driving car and you're driving along and you're involved in an accident, what goes wrong, what could happen, what laws does it affect? And there's so many things there. It's civil, it's criminal, there's a whole number of issues. You may even have an interest just in technology and cyber. And so I've really enjoyed my project because I've looked at so many different areas and looked all around the world to try and see what different jurisdictions are doing. And quite often we've been the first off the starting line that we've had to come up with a solution ourselves. So sometimes it's not about knowing exactly what it is you want to do, but knowing what you enjoy. And if you enjoy a broad array of work and then honing in on the detail, then explain that in your application, but use examples to back it up. So you may have done a dissertation or something like that, that you had a really broad question, but then you managed to narrow it down and come to some really solid conclusions. But you might have enjoyed the fact that you looked through, I don't know, however many transport regulations, and you're now an expert in the Road Traffic Act, or any of those sort of things. So I'd say think about the skills that you have and what you enjoy, and then try and relate that to a project that we are doing, or that we have maybe looked at in the different programs, and sell yourself that way. But I always get asked, well, once you're on a project, is that all that you do? But a lot of what we do is called peer reading and peer review. And you'll notice that when you read a Law Commission report, it's written so short, so concise. It's almost like an AI robot has written it for us. But the reason we get to that is because it goes through so many different layers of people. We swap amongst teams. That as a research assistant in the public law team, I'll look at some of Coco's work and check that everything makes sense. It is as it should be. And the reason why that is a good thing is because, one, it builds my skills, but it also checks that the work we're producing can be actually understood by everyday people. And so when I was reading on cryptocurrency, I was just like, yeah, I definitely do not want to practice in this, but I found it interesting. And I made sure that when the report was published, it was light reading compared to the amount of technical research that went on. So I would say that you just get a well-rounded experience when you are here, and you can develop your interests across areas.
Yeah, and now maybe I'll pass the next question on to Jess, which is sort of what makes an application really stand out, and in particular, how much sort of legal-based research experience do you need to apply? Never mind. Jess is back.
Sorry, were you asking someone else, or is it me? Yeah, it was me.
It's
Okay, I was just checking. So in terms of legal experience in a particular area, as I said, you don't need to be a specialist in it at all. I think Matt put it really well. Certainly in the automated vehicles review, which we've been working on for such a long time, it brings in lots of quote unquote basic legal skills that you might have come across in negligence and tort law, criminal law, lots of different areas that you can focus in on for different parts of the project. So I think you don't need special expertise. I think just a solid grounding and ability to see legal issues and then find out the answer and like direct yourself is what we're really looking for. So I think that that would be what I would say about the expertise side. And in terms of standing out, I think I mentioned it before. I really found that people that have taken an interest in also the more social and policy side, because I think it's easy to really focus on the technical aspects, which are so important. You can't get those wrong. Like you need to be able to identify the correct statutes or regulations or whatever aspects are being asked about. But then it's the contextualization and making the policy arguments and understanding how people might be receiving a particular outcome. If you find that an individual, say, who is in a self-driving car is not accountable in the criminal law, well, is that going to be something that people are going to be upset about because they can't just point the finger and blame somebody? And then you come into emphasizing the need for a safety culture and a shift in the way that we think about incidents and collisions and how we focus on improving things and the importance of transparency about how these things perform, for example. All these are non-legal type arguments, but they're really important in helping us develop our thinking also on the legal policy and how we can make it understandable to people.
Yeah, great. And I just seen some of your questions sort of about the diversity of our workforce. So I want to say that we do have a range of people from a range of backgrounds in the Law Commission. We have people of colour and a lot of international students as well. And we're also very keen to have people from as many backgrounds as possible apply. That's something that we're really committed to. So we're hoping that you're encouraged to apply no matter what background you come from. And I think sort of to finish off, maybe a good question would be sort of what a typical day of an RA looks like and what you particularly enjoy about the job. Maybe James can take that one.
Yep, the typical day would involve you get into work and then it's a fair amount of reading and writing. I think research is the bulk of what we do. You're a research assistant. So if you don't like legal research, then I'd say this really isn't the job for you, unfortunately. But if it's something that you do like, and you do learning about law and thinking about policy, then I guess that's the reason that you would do it. I think when you actually have a knotty problem and you're thinking about it and discussing, okay, how do we go about solving this? Who should we consult on this? I think that's probably the most enjoyable part of the job. I think the other enjoyable part of the job is actually you've got a good group of people that also like law around you. I think it's a good cohort. I don't think we have time for any more questions, or we. Okay, no more questions. Thank you very much for attending today. If you do have any more questions that you would like to ask, then we have a recruitment email available on screen. So please send your questions into that. There is also a huge amount of information we published in the Guide for Applicants, the template CV. There's profiles on research assistants on the website. So I'll say there's a lot of information out there for you to strengthen your application that you can rely on. And good luck. Thank you.